Well, thank you so much to everyone for being here. It's a real honor to be moderating today's panel. I am just so blown away by the three women who are here joining us today. They're also amazing product leaders, and that's actually how I know them, is through the various different connections that we have in Silicon Valley, which is very, very fun. So today we're going to talk about some of the diverse experiences that product managers have and how product can be led through many different styles, and also talking a little bit about allyship for product managers from underrepresented backgrounds. So I'm going to also do a little bit more of an extended bio for some of these people, but we're also going to talk a little bit about how you got into product in the first place. But Gloria currently is actually working on something new. We're very excited to see what that new thing is next. But she was the first product manager at Stripe. And also, and Stripe is a technology company that builds economic infrastructure for the internet. Gloria also previously led product at Flipboard and at Apple's iPhone, iPod New Tech Group. She also has a bachelor's and master's degree in electrical engineering at Stanford. Evonne heads up product at Accompany, and Accompany generates enterprise-grade data and insights on people and companies. Prior to Accompany, she was a director of acquisitions at RPX, an early-stage intellectual property startup, and she saw the company from employee number 6 through to IPO, which is pretty rad. She was also at Charles River Ventures, where she focused on early-stage software as a service, mobile, and robotics investments, and she holds degrees from Stanford in management science and engineering, as well as Harvard Business School. And then Jackie is the head of product management at Asana, a company redefining how companies and teams work together productively. Prior to being at Asana, Jackie was actually my first mentor at Google, and where she worked on data APIs and search, and she's also the author of Cracking the PM interview. She's also worked at Microsoft and graduated from Cornell in computer science and economics. So really awesome and impressive backgrounds. So with that, I'd love to just kind of start the conversation and ask you all, how did you get into product management?
Yes, how did I get into product management? So I think a lot of people talk about how they stumbled into product. I was actually a lot more calculated about it. Where I actually was, so I worked at an early stage startup before at RPX, where I was employee number 6, and absolutely loved my experience there. Like, really loved the experience of being at an early stage company. And so I was actually looking for a way of, like, how can I leverage my skill set and make sure that I can contribute to early stage startups? What's the best role that allows me to leverage my background in that sense? And so I actually, from doing a lot of research at business school and while I was in venture capital, found that like product was a great role that, one, kind of leveraged my skill set, especially being kind of more a jack of all trades person as opposed to like going really deep in design or engineering. But also was just a really integral role that sets the stage for a lot of things at a really early stage at a startup. And so that was how I chose product, and then kind of just went from there and looking for product roles.
I can go next. I took a pretty traditional path into product management. In college, I was trying to figure out what to do, and I had always loved the engineering side, where you try to figure out, take things apart, understand how systems are built, but at the same time, I was always really into kind of the business of technology and kind of just grown up around it, and so I found that product management was squarely at the intersection of the business part and the engineering part of startups, so it was pretty much a no-brainer for me to try that out.
Hi. So I took a pretty traditional route into product management. I did computer science and economics as an undergrad, and I'd always thought that I was going to have a career in a field, in some random field, but where I'd have the magic of computer science behind me, where I'll be the person who like knew how to write a script that would make me more effective and be able to use that technology to be better at my job. And as an undergrad, I had a friend who said, "Jackie, you have to be a PM." And I said, there's no way. What's a PM? It's got the word manager. I'm a sophomore. I can't be a manager. And they're like, "Jackie, just apply for the PM job. You got to go do it." And I basically learned during the interview what the job was. Like, from the questions they asked, I was like, oh, I guess that's what you need to do. You need to, like, calculate, how many ping pong balls are okay. But but I found that I really liked the questions, and I liked the people I worked with. So I went there, got my first job at Microsoft, and just loved it. And as soon as I was in the job, I felt like this was the job that that was meant for me.
That's super awesome. I love how there's this spectrum between being like traditional or calculating or just stumbling. I think as far as myself, Oh gosh, I think it was one of those kind of stumble kind of situations where I was at Google being a software engineer, and then someone was like, "You should really try out this product management thing," and I was like, "What's that?" Huh. And then I think I coerced a bunch of people to give me PM things to do, and at the end of the summer, I was like, "Oh no, they were right." And so product management is pretty different at every company. And I was kind of wondering if each of you could kind of talk about what a PM does, especially because I think you run the gamut of having worked at big companies, small companies, early stage, later stage. So it'd be just kind of great to get that perspective. Do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start. So I have a couple of kind of mnemonics around this. The first is that product managers help you build better products. And so how do you more deeply satisfy the needs or problems, solve the problems of your customers? And I find that the key here is just really, really deep. You basically can't go too deep to understand the problem. And then, of course, working with designers and engineers. In my experience, it's been really helpful most often to work in a small group that's deeply collaborative and cross-discipline. I found that kind of a lot of the magic of the best moments that I've had in my product management career have happened through those kinds of close collaborations that are interdisciplinary. And I think the second thing that product managers do really well is they help build products in a better way. And so that means kind of all of the stuff that needs to be done around the many, many things that need to happen in order to ship a great product. And I'm a big believer that constraints around your creativity and kind of having some boundaries actually really force innovation. And so I think that there are very lightweight ways to kind of structure process, so that's really helpful for your kind of creative process.
So yeah, I've done product at Asana and at Google and Microsoft, and it's definitely what PMs do is very different at those companies. And it really depends on the shape of the company, what the company's trying to achieve, and who else is on the team. So at Microsoft, there was a lot of expectation that the PMs would define every detail of how the product worked from the very, very beginning to the very end. And I spent a lot of my time writing those like 40-page specs and handing them over to the engineers, and they would assign me spec bugs back. They would say, you haven't written out what the words should say in the error message in this particular case. So I went from there to Google, which is a very engineering-led company, and it was a world of difference. It really was the engineers had an idea of what they were trying to achieve, and they were running with it, and I was really trying to connect that back to customer problems, connect that back to, if we solve this problem in this particular way, using this new technology, how can we connect that to a user need? And then moving from there to Asana, where we're really product-led, and the way we define it there is that PMs own the problems. So as a PM, you're responsible for figuring out what are the problems that we should be going after, which ones are the most important ones to solve, and how will we know if we've solved it? And then you work really closely with designers and engineers who are responsible for those solutions, and you're able to work with them to see, are the solutions meeting our needs of the problems?
I would echo both of those. I think from my perspective, product is a lot about being whatever your team needs you to be. And I think at an early stage startup, so for example, we have a very lean team, and each individual on the team owns massive parts of the product, the system, our customer relationships. So from my perspective, the most important things are to make sure that they're armed with everything that they need to run quickly and can make decisions mostly autonomously. So what I spend a lot of doing is making sure that we have a really clear and compelling vision so that they can make those decisions. And then I spend a lot of time making sure that we're communicating the product strategy and talking about it as a team. One, because it's motivating, and two, so then we know kind of this is where we're going and what's our progress towards those goals. And I think the third thing, maybe this is mostly specific to an early stage startup, is and everything else, which is like part COO, part engineering manager, part customer success manager, part data science, whatever needs to be done.
Awesome, great, thank you so much, everyone. So I want to transition a little bit and kind of talk about diverse perspectives, right? And I think each of you have your own set of experiences that make you a really great person to offer a diverse perspective to the audience here today. And so I was kind of wondering if you could kind of help orient the audience and letting them know how you self-identify as a product manager. And then also what challenges you've seen over the course of your career for PMs from underrepresented backgrounds.
I identify as female, and so thinking about like challenges I see with diverse people from diverse backgrounds. The one that really I see the most is that there's all kinds of different personality styles, there's all kinds of different traits that people have, but one of the things that's most important as PMs is our credibility, is that we walk into a room and we have to lead without influence. We need to convince a whole team of people to follow what we think is the right thing, and we can do that through data, and we can do that through facts and user research, but some of the time, and one of the ways that you make this go faster and more effective and more efficient as a PM is that you've earned credibility with people. They start to trust you, and they start to believe what you're saying as you go forward. And that's one of the places where I see coming from an underrepresented background can be more of a struggle, is that sometimes when you walk into the room and you're not a straight white man, people don't immediately look at you and say, that's someone who really knows what they're doing. Like, that's somebody who I'm sure like has her stuff together. I'm going to trust her right away. And so I think that when you come from an underrepresented background, it can take a few more days or weeks or months of proving yourself, a few more times of showing people that you're right about the opinions and the decisions you've made before you start to get that, before you start to earn that credibility.
Sure. I think what's interesting, because one of the questions we had talked about doing on this panel was like, what's it like to be a woman in product management? And I honestly thought, like, I've never even thought about it. Like, is it different? Which I think is a testament to like the companies and the leaders that I've worked with. It's like that should be the answer, right? It's like when you're coming from an underrepresented background, like it shouldn't really be a question. And so I think, especially in the tech community these days, I think there's a lot of appropriate focus on diversity and inclusion, which is great. But there are certainly some things that are challenges for underrepresented backgrounds that aren't for other people. And one thing that came to mind was, I was thinking when I first got into not even product management, but just my career. Thinking about like, when I say things, people don't always listen, and I don't think I'm asking questions in the right way, and maybe I'm not delivering things forcefully enough, et cetera. And I think in many ways that's true. I think as we progress in our careers, we start learning how to speak more assertively, and speak in a way that people really listen, and that gains credibility, for example. But I was reading a Harvard Business Review article that I think is worth mentioning, and it was about an analysis of Supreme Court justices' transcripts. And they were basically, the finding was that the men actually interrupted the women 3 times more than they interrupted each other. And I know that this isn't a new stat that women get interrupted more. But the takeaway that I got from it is that these are Supreme Court justices. Like I would be terrified to interrupt Sandra Day O'Connor. So to me, the takeaway was, it's not just about the delivery, and it's not just about status. There actually is more going on here. And so I think the goal is to just make everyone more aware of that, and I think underrepresented can mean a lot of different things. It's not necessarily men or women or minority or not. I definitely hear, from good friends, for example, a friend at a private equity firm was saying that he can't talk about sports. He's not interested in sports, and a lot of the community's conversations are about sports, and so he feels left out in that way, and feels like he can't bond as well with his coworkers. So I think one, we should just kind of broaden what we think about what underrepresented is, and just be more aware of the challenges from that context.
Yeah, so I also identify as female, but actually similar to Evonne, I actually haven't, I can't consciously remember that many times during my career, and I was like, how is it different for me as a woman in product management? I'm just sort of a product manager with all the fun challenges and opportunities that come along with that. But I was reflecting on this question, and I think the thing I actually struggled with was more consciously perhaps, was just looking really young I don't know if anybody else identifies with this, but I look about 10 years younger than I actually am. I like, get this pretty consistently from people. And that's kind of an interesting position to be in. I have kind of hacked my way around it by learning how to speak with authority and knowing my subject matter really, really well, and learning how to communicate effectively in small and large groups. But it was something that I kind of had to work around consciously. I actually also got like a communications coach and had friends, videotape me speaking, and then I'd rewatch the videotapes, and they were the worst things to watch ever. You just like don't want to hear yourself, you don't want to see yourself on video, but you kind of figure out some ways to kind of compensate for the ways that you might or might not be perceived in the world. It's kind of one way I've dealt with it.
That really resonates with me, and it's this kind of fun connective tissue between some of the different panelists, because I also struggle with looking younger, I think, than I actually am. And Evonne's the founder of Accompany. She was my manager like a long time ago, and I remember I think I was like 24, 25, and was going out meeting with a bunch of people on who were like the CMOs, CTOs of various different companies as a representative of Google Analytics. And she was like, Laura, I'm sorry, you just look way too young. You're dressing way too young. You need to be looking like late 20s, not early 20s in the way that you're dressing. And so I think there's a bit of performance that happens when you kind of come from an underrepresented background, where it is about gaining credibility and what are the different levers. And it's kind of unfortunate that we have to play that game sometimes, but I think that there's an opportunity for people who do have more privilege or authority or credibility to guide people and tell them what they need to be doing in order to get that credibility. So she told me to go out with my sister-in-law and get a fresh set of clothes from J.Crew. And then I was going to be ready to meet with the CMOs and tell them what they were doing wrong. So I guess with that in mind, would also love to ask this panel's advice for allyship. So what advice do you have to help people from underrepresented backgrounds and support them as they progress through their career?
There's so many things that you can do, but the good news is that a lot of these tactics are basically effective because they're making the standards more objective by which people get promoted or which they get hired. And so there's a whole list of things that people can do. Probably you've heard of many of them before. You can use Textio to run an analysis on your job descriptions and make sure that you're trying to remove as much implicit bias as possible in the actual job description and causing people to of all backgrounds to apply. You can black out the names of people who are applying to your company and actually try to do that as a software feature so that when you're reviewing the resume, you're trying to be less influenced by kind of potential factors in their background that are irrelevant to their work. You can kind of promote things like, I've seen things as simple as like little cards on meeting tables where it's like big conference room, and it's kind of like remind your moderators of meetings that, it doesn't have to be dominated by a few people. You should, actively draw out diverse perspectives from different meeting participants, particularly the quieter ones. And so it just kind of goes on and on and on, but I think the good news is that it just kind of helps everyone when you're able to be a bit more objective in the way that you hire, fire, promote, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's great. In terms of, I mentioned diversity, like you were saying, Evonne, there's so many different types of diversity, and I think when you learn about different personality types, I've had this experience repeatedly where I learned about a new personality type, and I said, I didn't realize people were like that. So I remember I learned about introverts versus extroverts, and they did this training, and they say extroverts like to think while they're talking, and that's me. And then introverts like to think things through quietly before they say anything. And they mentioned, so you might have somebody in the meeting who isn't speaking up, and they still have something to say. They just, were thinking through it quietly. And I was like, oh. I had no idea. I assumed the people in the conference rooms who were quiet just were quiet because they had nothing to add. And so I started, exactly what you said, going around the room and asking each person, do you have anything? Let's go around the room. And I was like, oh, all the quiet people have a lot of really good stuff to add. There was another personality test I took that talked about how people are oriented, and that like some people are very like external achievement oriented, and some people are very that if everybody in a room is agreeing, it makes them worried that you haven't figured out the tricky thing, the thing that's going to bite you. So they like to stir up trouble. There'll be always the person in the room who like surfaces the problem because they're worried if you're not talking about the problem, you're missing something important that's gonna come get you later. And I was like, oh, they're not just trying to like mess up my meeting; they're trying to be helpful. And so there's all of these different things that you learn about these different personality types, and you can realize that there's a lot more value that people are bringing, and the people that are different than you might have a different way of going about it and bringing their perspective. And at first you might think that's like the wrong way to bring your perspective. But once you can just accept that there are different ways of doing this, you have a chance to get the value from lots of different people.
Yes, completely agree. I think I think both Gloria and I'm sorry, Jackie, already touched on all these points. But the things I would add or kind of key activities at the company are important to make inclusive. So if you're having a meeting where you're making important decisions, all of the people that need to be in that meeting, it needs to be at a time, for example, that all of the people can attend. And there's a lot of other ways than just scheduling to be inclusive. But I think that's one important thing, and I think it doesn't just come down to meetings where important decisions are being made. I think it's also even social activities where people are bonding and getting to know each other, and maybe that's where you get to meet the manager who might be in charge of giving you your next project. Those things all are really important. The other two things that come to mind is one, just being aware of the unconscious biases that we all have. Those are just, they're things that have been researched and documented and reported. And I find myself doing it too, where there was a meeting the other day where I noticed that I was interrupting one of our female designers and not the male engineers in the room. And that's terrible. And I think awareness is where it starts so that we can start correcting that behavior. And I think the last thing is just creating an environment where people feel comfortable talking about these things and telling you what's wrong. Because I find that I often don't even realize what I don't know. And so, and I think the way you do that is just being like, one, making it clear to people that you care, and two, just really listening and making a change and making sure that change is visible.
Awesome. I'm glad this is getting recorded because you guys all had amazing pieces of advice. I think one of the interesting things about product management is that do whatever it takes, and it's a bunch of these small little things that you do every day that make people feel more included, make people feel like their voices are heard, and I think the products that we build are better because we make that investment. So thank you. I'll have to go and rewatch and write down notes. So I think we're getting close to the end of the time slot, and so I just wanted to end with one last question, which is mostly for y'all here, because I think most of you are kind of in the new to product management space. And so just wanted to ask you if you could share one tip to your former self when you were getting started in product management. What advice would you have given yourself?
I think I would have told myself, and I'm sure this is all very specific and individual, but for me it would have been helpful to hear that it's not just about being smart. Like the way that now I've realized that I should be measuring my progress as a PM is the team's collective success, and not not my individual goals, and not even the product success to some extent. Like I think that's really important too, of course, but also like, was the team happy in getting there? Did they grow in getting there? All of those things allow you to make a more solid team and a more solid product. And I think the second reason that advice would have been helpful is that when I started, I felt like, you're working around all these incredibly talented people, like, experts in their discipline. And I thought that I needed to have all the answers, that I should have, spec'd everything perfectly, and like it should never have had to go back and forth. And that's simply not true. You have all of these resources at your disposal and these amazingly talented people that you can just ask and you can collaborate on something with them. So that's what I would have told myself.
I think building on that, one of the concepts that I've learned about more recently is rapid prototyping and rapid iteration. And so related to the idea that you don't need to have all the answers at the beginning is, as an early PM, you spend a little too long iterating with yourself and getting stuff perfect. And so much of the time, throwing your first ideas out on paper, saying, here's a rough straw man, what do you think, can save you days, weeks. It can save you a huge amount of time from going totally down the wrong path. And if you frame it the right way, if you say, hey, I only spent a few minutes on this, here's my early draft, people react much better to that. If you say, hey, I've worked on this for 2 weeks, what do you think? People are a little bit afraid to give you real, honest feedback.
Yeah, I would definitely echo Evonne's answer, especially around the perfectionism. I think every time I've had a job I've wanted to do such a good job and do right by my users and do right by my team and work super hard, that I didn't allow myself a lot of leeway or freedom to not always do perfect work all the time. Of course I didn't, and I would just feel bad and feel guilty, and it's okay to not produce perfect work all the time. Like, it's really okay. You kind of have to keep as a product manager, there's so many things going on. You have to keep the big picture, and like the one most important question you're supposed to be working on in your job, are you making good progress on that? I think that's kind of the most important thing. So I would tell my younger self not to get too caught up in like doing all little details perfectly. Though it is still good to really care about, good design details and quality and performance and all that. But yeah, I think that perfectionism really got to me. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for bestowing your wisdom upon this group. I hope you all enjoyed hearing the different perspectives that these amazing product leads have to offer. And thank you so much.